The American governmental system is broken. It does not work, and does not represent the people it is supposed to stand for. It used to, though. Back when the Constitution was written, our government was envisioned as a representative democracy. The theory back in 1789 was that the United States would be divided up into districts of equal population. Each of these districts would then vote for a representative that they would send to vote on their behalf. This way, each person would receive roughly equal representation through their representative and how the government was run. Unimaginatively, these representatives reside in the branch of government named the House of Representatives. But to appease states back in 1789 that had smaller populations than others, there would be another House of Congress. The U.S. Senate would apportion 2 representatives chosen by the state to send to vote regardless of state population. A compromise to the adage, all men are created equal, certainly. Because if you are in a state with a small population, you have more representation than people in a state with a large population. The final elected position was the chief executive, the president of the United States. But the founders of the United States didn't trust the common folk of the US to directly elect this person by themselves without an educated check. This check would come to be called the Electoral College. When it was originally drafted, the system worked like so. You, the average voter, would go to the polls and choose who you wanted for your state government. Then, based on your vote, your state government would choose the electors. These electors would be part of the Electoral College, and these electors would take the real vote to elect the president. This causes another problem, which is that the number of electors that represent you is based on the amount of representatives each state has in each house of the U.S. Congress. So if you only qualify for 1 representative in the House, you still get 3 electors in the Electoral College because you also have 2 senators. Meaning, if your state has a very small population, your vote for president counts for far more than if you live in a state that has a large population. For a country that declared independence by stating that all men are created equal, the Constitution ended up with a system that did not count all votes equally. That is only the first of many issues with the Electoral College. The real problem originates from the aforementioned idea that the president should be indirectly elected and that the electors being chosen would actually decide who becomes president. That's why the Electoral College was set up to begin with, so that if the people of the United States wanted a president the electors didn't think was worthy, they could vote for someone they thought more sensible. However, today's electors vote for the person chosen on the ballot directly by the people pretty much no matter what, which makes the Electoral College pointless. Its original purpose is nowhere to be found, and now has become more of a hindrance than a help. So, we're already getting into how a country that declared all men equal does not give everyone equal voting power, but let's take a closer look. First, we will deal with the problems inherent in the Senate. Back in 1789, its creation seemed like a necessary compromise to get smaller states to sign the Constitution. But they did not envision the large population growth the world would experience, as Thomas Malthus's principle of population wouldn't be published for almost a decade still. The effect today can be clearly seen. Delaware has a population of 936,000. Texas has a population of 27 million. But both states get the same representation in the Senate. The result is a voter in Delaware has 28 times more say in the Senate than a voter in Texas. Although some from Delaware may dispute it, their vote is not 28 times more important than the vote of someone from Texas. Yet under the current system, that is exactly how it works. This introduces more problems with how the president is chosen. For example, North Dakota has a population of 740,000, California of 59 million. California has about 79 times the population of North Dakota, and North Dakota has 3 electors that count towards the president, which means under a fair system, California should get 239 electors to vote for president. Instead, under the current Electoral College, California gets just 55. Each vote from North Dakota for president counts for 4.3 votes from California for president. Staying on the Electoral College and its problems, matters are even worse than already stated, as most states are winner-take-all, which means that if half plus one of votes go for one candidate over another, then all of that state's votes count for that candidate. Worse than your vote not counting for anything, it counts for the person you didn't want to win. The end result of this is that a candidate can become president with around 25% of the total vote. If you ever wondered why people don't vote, this is part of the reason why. The refrain that you can't complain if you didn't vote is utter nonsense. Unless you live in Nebraska or Maine, which can split their electoral college votes amongst candidates, then your vote only counts if you vote for the majority. Thus, for nearly half the US, your vote is invalidated. It is not counted, you can't change anything. That a candidate can become president with 3 times less votes than their opponent, and that nearly half the US emphatically does not and cannot have a say one way or another in who becomes president, is quite obviously not democratic. That's just voting for president. Let's move on to how a voter might not have any say at all in the House of Representatives. Back in 1789, the exact rules for drawing up the districts for the House of Representatives were not laid out. After all, they all had to be equal population, and it was expected, even openly discussed by the writers of the Constitution, that political parties should not be formed. Political parties, as you know, very much did come into being, and people tend to vote for one party over another consistently. This allows for a very large and awkward word to be used that essentially means stealing most of a state's representatives for your party without the other party being able to do anything about it, also known as gerrymandering. The idea is actually fairly simple. There are only 2 parties to vote for. Why that is, we'll get into later, but there are only 2. So knowing this, and knowing that they vote based on district, they just carve up the districts as such. They make it so that as many districts as possible have just enough of a safe majority to vote for their party, and then put all the remaining people that vote for the other party into a district together. And that's it. They now have a majority of people in the House of Representatives for that state, despite the fact that the majority of people voted for a different party. So who needs to rig an election by rigging a vote count? The rules that already exist can be abused to rig it for them. So what then is the point of all this unfairness? The answer is to get the right people into power and then have them stay in power. If they only have to appease 25% of the people they're supposed to represent to get into the House of Representatives, or 25% of the people they're supposed to represent to get into the White House, then all they have to do is pick the right 25% and they're in. As Abraham Lincoln said, you can fool some of the people all of the time, and in America, some of the people is all they have to fool. Because if you have 25% of the power, then you can get the majority of power in the House of Representatives, and you need even less than that for the Senate. The 25 lowest population states have only 20% of the population of the entire US, and each senator is up for re-election separately. So there's no need to split votes. The majority in each state gets to decide the senator each time, so they only need half of the people in these states, or 10% of the approval of all the people in the US, to control the entire Senate. And since the majority always decides in both houses of Congress, they do have control. And that's all that's needed to stay in power, indefinitely. If the rulers of America have a near-zero approval rating, then they can just blame the other team for all the problems not being solved. Never mind that the team they may be on have the majority in both houses and have done so for years. They can do nothing to improve anything ad nauseum, and then assure people it is because the other team is at fault. If only they had more power, things would surely get better. And here's the thing, so long as they are in power, there is no reason to change the system that put them there. They can flounce all rules by, say, blocking the appointment of a Supreme Court judge, so they can choose one that ensures their continued control. They might even let a loudmouth puppet come to power, one who then turns over all power to his advisors, because now they have all the power. And the agreement for this is that they'll keep the 2-party system, so that way the other party, the other team, gets to blame them when things go wrong. The other team gets to stay in power too, because they are the only real opposition available. That is how we come to today, where the United States of America has a government that does not, in any way, shape, or form, represent the people under its rule. A country that has elected the least popular candidate for president in history, and then tells people on their team that the other team lost, so it's fine that you wanted to vote for someone else. It's fine that your victory isn't the one you wanted, because look, there's people worse off than you are. As if a Congress with a non-existent approval rating and only getting to choose between 2 of the most disliked presidential candidates in history is the way it's supposed to be. For a country that cried no taxation without representation as one of its founding slogans, America now has exactly that. The people that voted for the currently winning team will be tempted to follow their team's lead, saying the people of the United States can do nothing about it, that they deserve to have nothing change. When they were the losing team, they thought differently. But now that they are winning, everything is fine. At least it is until they become the losing team again. Well, it is not fine. The American government is broken. It does not work and does not represent the people of America. The winners are the people in power. We are the losers, those many who cannot use the current system to stop them. The people in power don't want to change anything. The system that brought them there, however rigged, however unfair, is what gave them that power, and they are not likely to give way to a system that could bring them down. Our only hope is you, the listener, to stand up and do something about it. To reject this system that does not and cannot represent you fairly. To rise up and take control of your nation. Things will not be fine. Things will not get better unless you get up and make them. This is up to you, America, to each individual American out there. 240 years ago, the people of this country, people much like you, saw that their governance was being taken away from them, and they rose up. So can you. You can do this. You can change the system. You can make every vote equal. You can make every vote count.